Born on September 7, 1939, in Vladivostok, into a family marked by war, his father a fighter pilot during the Second World War and his mother a nurse, Stanislav Petrov grew up in a world already brimming with tension between East and West. When he reached adulthood, the planet was divided into two opposing blocs, the Soviet Union and the United States of America, engaged in a silent and constant struggle, the Cold War. In those years, the threat of nuclear war was a daily presence, hanging like an invisible blade over the future of humanity. It was a time when a miscalculation, a misreading of a radar, a hastily communicated order could trigger global catastrophe. In this landscape of permanent fear, the life of a young Soviet officer became intertwined with the fate of the world. But can the judgment of a single man really decide the survival of an entire civilization? After his studies, Petrov enrolled in the Military Academy of Aeronautical Engineering in Kiev, which trained the technical elite of the Soviet Air Force. In 1972, he graduated and was assigned to the Vodska Protivovozdesnoye Oborony, the anti-aircraft defense forces charged with protecting Soviet skies. In those years, technology was at the heart of strategy. Radar, computers, and satellites marked the new military frontier. Petrov entered the program that controlled an early warning system designed to detect NATO intercontinental ballistic missile launches. Operating in that network meant navigating fragile terrain, where any glitch or calculation anomaly could translate into an irreversible order. No one could have imagined that he, trapped in that chain of protocols and machines, would one day find himself having to choose between blind obedience and reason. The year 1983 was one of the most critical moments of the Cold War. The Soviet Union and the United States were caught in a spiral of mutual distrust. On the one hand, the deployment of American Pershing II and cruise missiles in Europe; on the other, NATO exercises such as Able Archer, perceived by Moscow as possible cover for a real attack. The international climate was poisonous. A few weeks earlier, the downing of South Korean airliner KAL-007 by the Soviet Air Force had shocked the world and further exacerbated relations. In that atmosphere of suspicion, every electronic signal picked up by defense systems could trigger an irreversible conflict. It was an unstable equilibrium, made up of automatic protocols and decisions that had to be made in a matter of minutes. One mistake, a misinterpretation of data, was enough to escalate tensions into all-out nuclear war. On the night between September 25 and 26, 1983, at the secret Serpukhov 15 base, south of Moscow, the monitors of the Oko satellite system suddenly flashed. It was a few minutes before midnight when the sirens went off and a message appeared on the screens: missile launch detected. According to calculations, 5 intercontinental missiles with nuclear warheads had been launched from the United States and were headed for Soviet territory. The procedure was clear. Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov had to immediately notify his superiors, who would activate the chain of command all the way to the Kremlin. A single report from him would initiate the automatic nuclear response. In the air, the ticking of computers seemed to mark the seconds. In that dark room, illuminated only by the reflections of the consoles, every breath of those present weighed like a millstone. Before Petrov lay a choice that would decide the fate of the planet. The protocols left no doubt. If a launch was reported, the officer on duty was to transmit the alarm immediately. The Soviet Union would prepare a devastating retaliation, following the logic of mutually assured destruction. But Stanislav Petrov hesitated. He watched the data scroll on the monitors, listened to the alarms ticking off, yet something didn't add up. 5 missiles? Too few for a real attack. If the United States struck first, they would launch hundreds of weapons to annihilate every Soviet defense. The reasoning was simple, but it clashed with the rigidity of the rules. Around him, the other officers waited, motionless, as if suspended. Petrov felt the sweat dripping from his brow, his heart racing, but he remained lucid. In that moment, he understood that a single error in judgment would turn millions of lives to ashes. The choice he was about to make was not foreseen in any manual. Against all written rules, Petrov took a deep breath and classified the alarm as false. He did not transmit the signal to higher command, assuming a responsibility beyond his rank. The room remained silent, broken only by the beating of the machinery. A few interminable minutes passed, while the supposed missiles should have crossed space and crashed into Soviet soil. But nothing happened. The sky remained still, the earth intact. Only then did it become clear that there had been no attack. It was a satellite system error, deceived by the sun's reflections on the clouds. No manual had told him to doubt, no order had allowed him to disobey. But his logical instincts and his cool head prevented the outbreak of a global nuclear war. In those hours, unknowingly, a little-known officer had saved the world. Yet, at the end of that night, there were no medals or applause, only silence and the weight of a secret. Only later did specialists discover the source of the alarm. The Oko satellites had confused the sun's reflections on the clouds with the glare of a missile launch. A technical error, yet one that could have destroyed human civilization had Petrov followed the rules. The incident, however, remained hidden. It didn't appear in the newspapers, it wasn't publicized, it wasn't celebrated as a heroic act. For years, no one knew that on the night of September 26, 1983, humanity had been on the brink of apocalypse. Only in 1988, with the end of military secrecy, did a Soviet general speak publicly about that episode, calling Petrov the man who had saved humanity. An uncomfortable truth, because it reminded the world of how fragile the nuclear balance was and how much it depended, paradoxically, not on technology but on the intuition of a single officer. But why was such a crucial story kept silent for so long? Stanislav Petrov continued to serve in the Soviet army until the mid-1980s, then retired to private life, far from the spotlight. His story remained almost forgotten, while his personal life was marked by pain. In 1997, he lost his wife Raisa to cancer, and he had to raise his children Dmitry and Elena amidst hardship and silence. Only many years later did the world begin to recognize his gesture. In 2004, the World Citizens Association symbolically awarded him $1,000, followed by recognitions from the United Nations and in Germany, culminating in the Dresden Prize in 2013. Meanwhile, his story inspired documentaries and books, such as The Man Who Stopped the Apocalypse. Petrov died on May 19, 2017, in Fryazino, from pneumonia, at the age of 77. News of his death arrived only months later. The final question remains: to what extent can the fate of the Earth depend on the silent judgment of a single man?